Hi, I'm Annalee, and this is my YouTube knitting journal. My name is Annalee, and I live in Seattle. I have 3 large dogs, 2 teenage children, and 1 handsome Latino husband. I also have a huge passion for knitting, and that's why I started this YouTube knitting journal, so that I can have a way to document the hobby that I love so much. Now, it's been a little scary for me to do this, and that's actually part of the reason that I decided to start this channel. Putting myself out there when I know that I'm not an expert at making videos. I know that I'm going to be stumbling over my words. I know that sometimes my voice is going to get a little scratchy and so on. And just putting it out there anyway, I think is a really good exercise for me. I've been, over the past week, thinking a little bit about just the idea of perfectionism. I think I'm definitely a perfectionist. Many people are. And it has come up a few times related to my knitting hobby. But to start out, I want to tell you what I'm wearing. This is the Illuminate sweater. It's a pattern by Andrea Mowry. I think it was her Rhinebeck sweater for 2021. Now, I haven't ever been to Rhinebeck. I just made it because I think it was a beautiful pattern. I made it it's got 2 different yarns. The darker color, the purple, is the yarn that was called for in the pattern. So it's Spincycle Nocturne. And I chose the color Silhouette, which is this purpley color. Nocturne, I understand, is dyed on a gray base. So the color comes out a little bit darker and moodier than when they dye on a white base. And for the contrast color, the light blue here, it's a fuzzy silk mohair. It's Drops Kidsilk. So as I put this sweater on, I remembered something about it. And that is that I actually altered this pattern a little bit when I made it. I altered the color work chart. There's actually 2 different color work charts. I think there was one chart for the upper portion, a second chart for the center portion, and then you repeat the first chart. And I noticed that, at least for my size, it may line up differently for different sizes, but at least for my size, the center chart wasn't going to be aligned symmetrically with respect to the first and the third charts. The motif would be a little bit off-centered, a little bit staggered. That's probably something that is very minor to most people. There are thousands of people that have made this sweater, and probably many or most of them had no idea that it was even off-centered. But something about my brain, I really like symmetry, and I think it would have made me a little bit crazy to not have it be symmetrical, even if I was the only one that noticed. So I altered the color work chart a little bit. I think I deleted a couple of the columns or made some of the lines only 1 stitch wide instead of 2 stitches wide, something like that, in order to make it line up symmetrically. So I have mixed feelings about whether that was a cool thing for me to have done or whether that was an over-the-top thing for me to have done. I go back and forth because on one hand, it can be really comforting to have near total control over at least one thing in my life, my knitting. I can make every stitch as intended, and there's so few places in life where things turn out as you want or as you intend. Life is just messy and unfair and imperfect, and it can feel good to have one thing. Okay, at least with this sweater, I know for sure I have exactly the number of stitches that I intended to have or that I wanted to have, and to have it be at least close to perfect. On the other hand, it's never going to be 100% perfect. Nothing we do, nothing we make. And in a lot of ways, that can be the beauty of something handmade. So I do try to encourage myself to be okay with a couple of mistakes, to accept a little bit of imperfection in my projects. But it really is about finding the right balance. Finding the right balance between what is worth going back to fix because it's something that I know will make me happier, or whether it's something to accept and to live with, and maybe not even thinking of it as needing to be fixed or as broken. That, sometimes things just aren't going to be 100% symmetrical, and that can be okay. My last video, I talked about 45 unknit sweaters in my stash. So I have 45 sweater quantities of yarn, and I already know what patterns I want to make with them. So I have these projects all planned out, and I just need to knit them. I need to make sure that my pace of knitting is faster than my pace of buying more yarn and planning more projects. That has definitely not been the case over the last few years. So I've made a goal to try to knit these 45 sweaters within the next 3 years. To make it more exciting, I'm going to use a random number generator. It's part of a very simple Python program that I wrote to choose which project I work on. So at the end of my last episode, I ran the program, it chose a project for me, and I ended up casting it on that night. I realized after I published my video that when I announced or showed what the program chose as my next project, I probably should have showed another picture of it, or showed the yarn again, or talked about my thoughts on it. In fact, somebody left me a comment requesting that I do that very thing, and that's very useful feedback. It's just an example of how that video was not perfect, and it's okay. It's okay. I'm still, making these videos, documenting this for myself, and I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and it's okay that it's not perfect. So actually, on that note, I wanted to share something from, this is a book that I got a few years ago. It's called Art and Fear. And it kind of just explores some of the reasons why artists might give up. I don't know if I consider myself an artist necessarily, although I guess I could pretty well argue that my knitting is a form of art. I've just always thought of myself as much more of a technical person. I really like math because it's unambiguous, whether something is right or wrong, whether something is proven to be true or not. And art is not that way. People have different opinions, and there is not always a definite right and wrong answer, which can sometimes be uncomfortable. But I guess it's fair to say that I'm a creative person, again, at least with knitting. Anyway, there's a little paragraph from this book that I wanted to share because it does resonate so much with me, and it might resonate to other people too. I'd be interested to know if it does. So this is on page 29 of the book, and the title of this section is Perfection. The ceramics teacher announced on opening day that he was dividing the class into 2 groups. All those on the left side of the studio, he said, would be graded solely on the quantity of the work they produced. All those on the right solely on its quality. His procedure was simple. On the final day of class, he would bring in his bathroom scales and weigh the work of the quantity group. 50 pounds of pots rated an A, 40 pounds a B, and so on. Those being graded on quality, however, needed to produce only 1 pot, albeit a perfect one, to get an A. Well, came grading time, and a curious fact emerged. The works of the highest quality were all produced by the group being graded for quantity. It seemed that while the quantity group was busily churning out piles of work and learning from their mistakes, the quality group had sat theorizing about perfection, and in the end had little more to show for their efforts than grandiose theories and a pile of dead clay. So there are so many lessons for me to learn from that little anecdote. And I have been trying to learn these lessons probably my whole life, and it will probably be a continued work in progress for the rest of my life. Just learning that it's okay to do things that aren't perfect, and that actually by making mistakes, I'm learning and I'm getting better and I'm improving. And the quality of the things I produce or the things that I do can actually be better if I let go of the notion of perfection and just do it, because then I will be gradually getting better over time instead of stressing out over trying to produce something that's perfect. Anyway, all right, why don't I show you what I have been working on? First, I want to talk about that project that was chosen for me by my little Python program at the end of my last episode. The project that was chosen, and I cast on that same night, is called the Korshavn Slipover by Tvinni Hodni. Now, I may have pronounced that name not quite correctly, but again, it's okay to not be perfect. This pattern is a slipover or a vest, and it's got a really nice motif that ends up looking like woven strips. And I believe this designer actually has several patterns that use this motif. I think there was a pullover, maybe even a cardigan. I wanted to make the vest because I think that is something that I could get a lot of use out of in my wardrobe. I don't really have any hand knit vests that I've made so far. The yarn that I am using is from Jamieson's of Shetland. This is Shetland Heather. It's an Aran weight yarn, and it says on the label, 100% pure Shetland wool grown and spun on the Shetland Isles of Scotland. And I love that idea. I really wanted to try this yarn. It's a little bit pricey, it seems to me. I think it was about $12.50 per 50 gram ball. So not the most expensive yarn out there, but definitely not the most affordable either. But it's supposed to be really hardy, and I'm looking forward to seeing, what the finished blocked project looks like and how well it manages to hold up over time. From what I can tell, it's not pilling at all yet, which is great. It is kind of rough, or I would actually think of it as sticky. At one point, I had made a mistake. I needed to pick up stitches and start knitting on the front. And the first row was supposed to be a wrong side row, but I accidentally did a right side row. So I had to rip out some of the knitting to redo it. And I didn't put in a lifeline or anything. I just took it off the needles and pulled out, I think it was 8 rows or something. And I was able to easily recapture all of the live stitches onto my needles. None of the stitches dropped or ran at all. They just stayed in place unless I really yanked at them to undo the stitches. That being said, it wasn't difficult to do a little bit of frogging to pull out some of the stitches. So in that sense, the kind of stickiness of the wool makes it really nice to work with, makes it easy to work with. Now the way it's constructed is that you start by casting on in the round, and you knit a few inches of twisted rib. Then you knit a few rounds of this motif in the round. Then you cast off some stitches on the side, on either side, and you knit the front and back separately. So I have completed the back, and so those stitches are on hold, and I have started the front. Once I am finished with the front, and I will at some point have to do the right shoulder and the left shoulder separately to make room for the neck, then I will pick up stitches around each of the armholes and knit some ribbing, and then pick up stitches around the neckline and make some ribbing. So this project is a little bit more than halfway done. It was probably a really nice option for the first project on my list of 45 because I'm going to get it done fairly quickly, and that hopefully will give me momentum to keep going. So one thing that I decided to do for this pattern was to again alter it to try to achieve more symmetry. Now, at least for my size in this pattern, the way it was written, this motif would not have been centered in the back or in the front. What would have happened is that you would have a partial square on one end. I say square, it's kind of the square part of the motif. You would have had a partial one on one side, and then on the other end, a full one. That's probably something that a lot of people wouldn't notice or care about, but it would have driven me crazy to have that not be centered. And because that's something fairly easy to adjust, I decided to go ahead and just make the adjustment. So what I ended up doing is making the back 2 stitches wider than the front. And I think that works out because I think that it'll look nice for the shape of the slipover or vest to cut in a little bit more on the front and then be slightly wider on the back. That doesn't mean that the entire thing is going to be perfectly symmetrical. On the sides, what you do is you cast off some stitches here. You work across, you work all the way to the end of the row, and then you turn, start the next row, and cast off a couple stitches at the other end and work back. Cast off a few stitches at the beginning of the row, work across all the way to the end, cast off a few stitches at the next row, and so on. So that the stitches that you've cast off on the right side of the garment and the left side of the garment are offset by 1 row. That's just a tiny amount. 1 row of knitting out of, I think this entire thing is going to be well over 100 rows, even knit at kind of a larger gauge. it's going to be nearly impossible to notice. And just because of the nature of knitting, it wouldn't really be possible, or at least not very easily, if there's a way, to have them be, the cast off stitches be on exactly the same row on both sides. One last thing that I thought I would mention is that I also adjusted this slightly because my gauge is a little bit smaller than what's called for in the pattern. The pattern calls for a bulky weight yarn held together with a strand of silk mohair. And I do love a good silk mohair, but I don't think it needs to be in every garment that I make. And I wanted to use the wool on its own for this garment. This is not quite a bulky weight, it's an Aran weight yarn. So between that and the fact that I'm not using a strand of silk mohair, I did use a slightly smaller needle and my gauge is a little bit smaller. So I am following the stitch counts for a larger size than I would have otherwise, just in order to make it fit me with the smaller gauge. Now, I expect that I can have this done within the next few days. I look forward to seeing it blocked, and then I will run my Python program again, and it will randomly select another pattern from my queue, which is now down to only 44 patterns, and I will cast that on. Now, that's not my only project. One of the other projects that I'm working on right now was my New Year's Day cast on. And this is one that I don't have a pattern for. So this is just a very basic top-down round yoke sweater. And the yarn that I'm using is called Luminosa. It's by Cascade Yarns, although I believe that it's discontinued. One of the YouTube channels that I really like to watch, because I love to watch other people talk about their knitting, is Tara Marie on Mare Makes. And she showed a sweater that she made out of this same kind of yarn, although in a different colorway. And I thought it was beautiful and decided to shamelessly copy her. Tara Marie did use a pattern. She made the DRK Everyday Sweater by Andrea Mowry, but I decided to make a sweater without a pattern because sometimes I enjoy being able to kind of wing it and, figure out the stitch counts for myself. So the yarn is very cool because it's one of those yarns that is constructed like a mesh tube, and the mesh tube here is this slightly shiny red material, and then it's filled with black alpaca fibers. There's a little bit of wool, but it's mostly alpaca that it gets filled with. So the result is you have an effect that I'm not even sure the camera can capture, where it's a little bit of shine, but also very fluffy and soft. And I just absolutely love it. So I'm almost done. I have completed the body. And again, copying Tara Marie, I did a broken rib on the bottom hem. And I have completed one sleeve. And I have started the second sleeve. So this is about 85% of the way done. I will probably also finish this one in the next couple of days, and I'm looking forward to being able to wear this before the weather becomes too warm for it. All right, I mentioned in a previous episode that my mom and I have been having Skype dates where we knit together. And my mom has asked me to help her learn how to knit a few different things. So we've been doing that via Skype. And I'm so grateful for technology that allows us to spend time together, even though we live hundreds of miles apart. My mom had asked me to help her with making a pair of socks. and I gave her some yarn from my stash that I have quite a bit of in a few different colorways. This is by Regia in collaboration with Wool and the Gang. It's called Kinda Magic sock yarn. And what it is a self-patterning yarn, so that if you knit it at just the right gauge, the colors on each row line up and make what are supposed to look like leopard spots. It's a little bit hard to see because I haven't gotten very far on these ones, but my mom actually asked me if we could put these ones on this project on pause to work on a different project. So that's why I haven't gotten very far on these. This is just resting for a little bit while we work on something else. My mom wanted to make a hat for someone that has a birthday coming up. So I fortunately had a hat project that I was able to cast on with her. Now it's sitting in a Spincycle yarns bag, but it's not made with Spincycle yarns. I just like reusing bags when I am able to. This is another project that I don't have a pattern for. I believe that there is at least one very similar pattern out there. I've seen a lot of people make the Oslo hat by Petite Knit, which appears to be pretty similar. But it's just a folded brim hat, so very basic. But I decided to just figure out the numbers for myself with the gauge that I was getting with the yarn. So I've actually completed one, although it hasn't been blocked, so hopefully it will lay a little bit nicer, a little bit more flat once I've blocked it. Right now it kind of wants to unfold, and there's a little bit of a reverse stockinette section when you look at the hat this way, so that when you fold the hat up, you have a nice smooth stockinette folded part on the brim. So I've finished one and I've started a second. So tomorrow morning, my mom and I are going to have our next Skype date, and we are going to start the decreases. Now the reason I'm making two hats is because I've decided to make one for my daughter and one for her boyfriend. I was browsing on yarn.com, which is webs. This was at least a month or so ago. And I was looking at their clearance section, and they had some yarn on clearance. It's called Cascade Color Duo. And it appears that that line of yarn was designed to match the colors of NFL teams. And they had only two colors left in stock. One of the colors was called Denver, so for the color of the Denver Broncos, and one of the colors was called Seattle, color of the Seattle Seahawks. The fact that it was those two teams or those two cities I thought was perfect, because my daughter's boyfriend, his favorite NFL team is the Broncos. And my daughter, I don't think she necessarily has a favorite NFL team, at least not one that she has talked about a lot, but obviously there's a connection to Seattle, and boy, people in Seattle here really do love their Seahawks. So I thought it would be fun for my daughter and her boyfriend to both have hats, his for the Denver Broncos and hers for the Seattle Seahawks. So I ordered this yarn. This yarn it's 70% alpaca, 30% wool. So it's got that softness and that drapiness of wool, or excuse me, of alpaca. So hopefully I've knit it at a tight enough gauge that it will hold its shape at least a little bit. I have a feeling that I might have to tack down this folded brim in order to keep it in place, but we'll see how it responds to being blocked. Another thing that I've done is I've ordered from a shop on Etsy a patch with, it's like the throwback Denver Broncos logo, and a patch with the throwback Seattle Seahawks logo. So when those arrive, they should be here any day now. When those arrive, I will sew them on, and I think those should be very fun. The yarn is very soft, and I look forward to giving these to my daughter and her boyfriend. I hope they like them. And meanwhile, my mom will be finishing up her project this week, and she can give that hat to its intended recipient. All right. Now, even though it's a pretty ambitious goal to complete 45 sweaters in the next 3 years, I think I can do it. These 45 unknit sweaters in my stash, because I do knit a lot, and I gave myself a little bit of room in that plan to also work on projects that are not part of that list. Obviously, I've showed you a couple projects already, and I decided to start working on an additional project, throw one into the mix. This is a pattern that the moment I saw it, I fell in love with it. I loved absolutely everything about it, and I wanted to have one for myself. I wanted to have one exactly like it, same color and everything. And this is the Agnete Cardigan by Petite Knit. So this is a recently published pattern. And I bought it the day that it came out because I had seen it and I really wanted to make it. Now, the designer actually described it in Instagram as a labor of love, I think. She said it was a complicated design. It took a really long time to knit. So I expect it's going to be one of those projects that takes me a while. I'm going to kind of have it going on in the background. It'll probably take me months to finish, but that's okay. I'll get there eventually. All right, so the Agnete Cardigan is it's brioche, and it's knit with a strand of wool held with a strand of silk mohair. I was able to find some of the wool that was called for in the pattern. I was excited because I really, really like the color. So this is from Isager yarns. It's called Tvinni. And the color is called Tart Cherry. I just think it's so pretty. It's a pretty light yarn. It's like a light fingering. So there's over 500 meters in just 100 grams. Now, the designer apparently wanted to pair it with some silk mohair in the exact same color, and she asked a company to produce some silk mohair in that exact same color for her. I wasn't able to find that brand available in the US, so I got some Rowan Kidsilk Haze to use instead, and I think it looks just fine. I think it looks beautiful. So here's my swatch. It is knit with 3mm needles, so pretty fine, pretty fine gauge. That's part of what is going to make this such a time-consuming project. But yeah, all I've done so far is a swatch. Well, I haven't even completely finished the swatch. I'll probably do another inch or two before I block it and see what my gauge comes out to be. But I'm just looking forward to having this project kind of in the background, and maybe by this time next year I will have finished it. All right, that's everything that I have on my needles, but I do have one more thing to show because it's related to this notion of perfectionism in knitting. This is an old project that lives in my yarn brain bag. I love this. This is me, 100%. Now, this is a sweater that I started probably two and a half years ago. It's a pattern from the book Strange Brew by Tin Can Knits. Now that book is really great. It gives not only a few different patterns, but it really just talks about, in general, how to construct a round yoke colorwork sweater. And it gives you, it teaches you the tools that you need to kind of make your own sweaters or design your own or customize them. Let's see, what is it called? This is a pattern called the Marshland, and I've been knitting it using Knit Picks Palette, which is a fingering weight yarn, but I have been holding it triple, not using 3 separate balls, but by chain plying. So with chain plying, you essentially make these really long crochet chain loops, and that allows you to hold 3 plies at the same time. So it comes out to about an Aran weight, or maybe a little bit heavier. Now I absolutely love the colors in this. I am not one to shy away from bright colors. I think that the tension of the color work is good, but it definitely doesn't fit me. I've tried it on and it's huge, and not only that, but the proportions are a little funny because for some reason I decided to try making some short rows in the back that I think I just didn't make them the right proportions, and it's been hard for me to figure out what to do about this because it is beautiful. But I decided that the other side of that nirvana fallacy, it's a theory I think used in economics to talk about how we shouldn't not enact a policy that isn't perfect, even if it will give us incremental improvements. That sometimes we don't even enact the best available policy just because it's not perfect. So kind of the other side of the coin from the nirvana fallacy is the sunk cost fallacy. I shouldn't feel obligated to continue working on or keep or finish a project that I don't love, that I know I'm not going to wear. I may as well frog it and put this yarn to good use, to better use. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm not sure what I will do with this yarn. Maybe use it in a different project. Maybe I'll try starting this project again, and I can adjust the proportions. I know a little bit more about the sweater proportions that work for me than I did when I first started this project. Thank you so much for being here with me and listening to me ramble on about knitting and my struggles with perfectionism. I look forward to coming back soon, hopefully with a couple of finished objects, and I will choose the next unknit sweater in my stash to tackle. Until then, bye.